and the model that we're going to redefine this culture. And then operationalizing for normative diagnosis and development. We have a few slides on additional insights into culture from the model. And then we'll have a questions and answer session. So please submit questions during the presentation via the chat window. Okay. So here we are, ODTI. We research, develop, and so on this dynamic systems maturity theory, and it definitively is next generation change and transformation management. This is myself, my background in management psychology, finance, and
can you?
Hello? Hello? Is everything all right? Oh, I'll proceed.
Everything seems okay, Miles.
Okay.
The other participants are muted to avoid background noise.
Okay, I just heard some noises there. All right. So this is myself, and that background gave me a significant advantage to come up with this theory, because psychology is biased towards the lower end of maturity, if you like, through troublesome human nature. Management and organizational science is biased towards the higher end, and you know, it takes that kind of breadth to bring together to something that works. Okay, so what is the problem we're dealing with? This is familiar stuff to you all, I'm sure. The VUCA nomenclature. What's troubling organizations is the volatility, uncertainty, and so on of current markets. And it demands organizational responsiveness, change, transition or transformation, in other words, agility. So the problem is that our models are not working. There's obviously problems with outdated modeling, because we still have failure rates of change management at 75%. Now these are itemized in Byrne's definitive text on change management in 2017, I think. And he itemizes it from 1960. So it's not a made up figure, tons of research, it persists. I will show you later that it's nothing to do with really methods of change, it has to do with the organizations themselves. And an example of mergers and acquisitions problems, 50% fail to reach returns above the average for the market sector after 3 years. So that's General GE Capital with that research. So these figures are not loose, and they are real over persistent periods of time. Everyone wants agility, 300% premium to market average, but only 2% are achieving it. And inversion, which is a concept we'll talk about, gives 500% discount, but it affects 52% of organizations. So there's something dramatically wrong out there. And it is around this idea of simplistic modeling about complexity, this VUCA environment. The simplistic modeling is not coping. And this is a comment made by one of my earlier reviewers, is Professor William Joyce. He turned around General Electric, General Motors, and that's his assessment that the model, you can see it on our website in the endorsements page, that it brings structure to complexity. Now, the simplistic models, you have models out there that people are using and they actually have a question mark instead of a phase. In other words, the originator ran out of ideas. This 5 easy step modeling is more to do with the limitations of people's thinking rather than what actually works. Models that appeal to learning where there is no model of learning. There's loads of them. And psychology has not come up with a model of learning. The paradigm shifted in the 60s away from learning. And what my model does is go back to learning, bring schools together in an integrative manner. So a lot of models out there are descriptive models, and they're based on what's happening elsewhere. And there's one, I won't mention any names, it's based on CEO opinions. Now that is not science. That is not objective, it is not reliable, and it's no wonder we have these high failure rates. And I would like to just briefly interject what failure looks like, because what stirred me to spend 15 years perfecting this model Well, it started with an organization that brought in self-directed teams in a culture that was defined by embezzlement among management, bullying on the shop floor. And when it brought in this self-directed structure, literally whatever discipline had been there, which was low, it evaporated and accidents started to happen. A large accident happened and the organization shut with significant, regionally significant loss of jobs. So, you know, I was in after that, and you know, this is failure. Terrible. That kind of thing shouldn't have been brought into a culture like that. And I'll show you how we can diagnose and define, be more definitive in our approach in the future. So the solution is dynamic systems maturity theory. It's a fully researched, completed normative theory. In other words, this is how human systems, how socioeconomic systems learn, how they should learn. It's peer-reviewed, as I said, of unprecedented depth and scope. I like that. I like that quotation. So it is integrated research from psychology, organizational science, economics, and systems theory. Now, it has been validated for both psychology and organizational science. There is a thesis written on in economic development. It has not yet been reviewed. So it's a fully operationalizable process. This isn't just a talking shop, a tool for discussion. We have a normative development process to build sustainable agility. What we do is we diagnose the maturity level of critical capabilities as a base where we can aim interventions to gain traction. So if you pitch it where the learning capacity of the organization exists along its capabilities, you get traction. We have a normative, phased process of development, and you stick to that. This is how human systems learn. That is your sustainability. These are the two things that are missing in prevailing methods. And it newly defines the likes of habituation, where organizations get stuck, and inversion, how they degrade. Now, the habituation is particularly important to us today. We were discussing culture, and we'll come to that in a moment. This is another review comment: redefining change management and building organizations fit for the 21st century. So that's what we're about. Now, what of culture? You have quotations like these that give the belief that culture is extremely significant. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, probably the most notable one. Culture is cited so often as the reason for failure rates, in that instance in the research I mentioned earlier by GE Capital. But how is it addressed up to now? Okay, even though it is so important, it has avoided definition, modeling, operationalization, etc. And listen, at best, it is literally loosely described as the way we do things around here. So we can agree any surveys, and this is important to distinguish between what we're about. We can agree any surveys and assessments that offer descriptions of prevailing processes and behaviors, they're measuring culture. Okay, so if you look at what an organization is doing as it is culture. It is not maturity, and that is the difference we're going to elaborate. Now, this is the typical elemental approach to culture change. You have construct definitions given like this: uncertainty, avoidance, power distance. This is just a random take on one approach to culture. You know, these are disjointed. They're rather than causal conditions. There is no prescription for development. You score between 1 and 7. What does that tell you you need to do as part of the same model? Nothing. There's no definition of culture as a learning system. And all of these elements are in fact addressed by the DSMT model. Now, this in a snapshot is our scaled model, our phased model. We have in red and blue, we have 2 divisions. Now, a quick insight into something that's coming up later. The bottom model, the bottom half in red, 51% of organizations are at this level, in the red zone, if you like. What is important to understand here is that there is no integrative capacity for any capability that is measured in this half of the model. All interventions that are pitched at this level will fail without preparatory work, which the DSMT model prescribes. There is no chance of success. So that's a large chunk of your high failure rate straight away. If 51% of organizations are without hope of a good outcome for interventions, well, there you are. There's only 21% in the top 3 levels, which is where everyone really wants to be. So you have a standard scale. All the things that you would look for from a scientific model, practices, behaviors, etc., can be classed at each level, can be applied to systems and subsystems. It generates trust and confidence. I'm going to take you through the 7 levels as they would be operationalized in a change management process. Excuse me. So our first level has 3 sub-levels, if you like. Regenerative disruption. Your first port of call in change management is to motivate. The CN stands for critical network. Is to get a group of people, wherever the motivation is, find out who is motivated and work on them. The disruption comes from the new idea. You present a new idea. You present a diagnostic. The graphic diagnostic from our model can shake people. You want to create this disorienting dilemma. This is a term from psychology. All learning starts with a disorienting dilemma. You have a situation where you cannot accept the status quo. Things have to change. You are emotionally affected. That is a disorienting dilemma. That's where you start. And you have to motivate critical people through the organization with this level of motivation. Organize then the disconnect phase. This is, you organize a collective decisive disconnect. Unless you get that, you're going nowhere either. It has to be decisive. People have to know they've crossed the line. The next stage is to facilitate those people that are so motivated in the critical network in planning the development of the capability. This is our incubation phase. Critical singularity is where your leader typically takes accountability. Now, critical singularity cuts across all capabilities, as we'll see in a moment, but typically in behavioral capabilities in particular, the leader has to take accountability. Other capabilities, you can establish a totem win. Some flagship customer is brought on board, some new product is launched, and so on. Our critical divergence is to delegate to this critical network that they will drive the change home. They will be seen to walk the talk, all that kind of thing. We need to diversify from critical singularities in a product, get some other product out. Opportunism is a feature of this phase as well. The next phase is stabilization. So this is a critical cultural issue. You have to onboard the people. You have to pay attention to this, organize whatever communication strategies are necessary, whatever types of meetings, workshops, and so on. This is the phase when the leadership and the critical network are seen to be serious. You manage the socio-emotional issues and look back at the opportunities and make choices from them, if you like. But this most critically is managing the socio-emotional issues. This is where to do it. You can't go any further without doing that. When you have that on board to a degree, you challenge the people. You resource the opportunities, you pilot. This is the destabilization, if you like. Those people or sectors or products or whatever they are that are gaining traction, that's what you would resource to drive your organizational strategy for the capabilities forward. It is only then that you can engage people in training and development. Then you put in your process and procedure. Then you engage in the marketplace. You energize, benchmark, customer care. The key thing here is dynamic learning. The people who are facing with the customer are feeding back information. This is environmental scanning on a systemic basis. And then you customerize your system. Everything is brought to bear on the customer. Boundaryless system is only possible at this stage as well. And any attempts to preempt that are going to fail, including matrix structures. Okay, so when you have a dynamic learning workforce, then they have earned the right, the company has earned the right for the real empowerment, for empowerment that is real. Self-expression, an expressionist culture, as we see. This is what happens at this phase. This is allowing people to engage in solving their own problems, connecting with whoever they like through this boundaryless system to solve their problems, etc. This is called open innovation. But this model takes beyond open innovation. And it is only when you have that level of engagement from your people can you really establish this self-organized team structure, the autonomous structures and so on, collaboration. Now you can imagine the failure case that I spoke about earlier. You can guess where the organization was. If you have management embezzlement and so on, you're in this level. This is your regenerative disruption. This is degenerative disruption, unfortunately. And what they wanted to bring in was at 6A, 6B. So, that's the problem with the prevailing approaches to change management. You have to bridge the gap. Our integrative leadership is your win-win positioning. That's not necessarily sharing, equal sharing or anything like that. It is just to ensure that the suppliers, customers, whoever they be, are with the arrangement in a sustainable go-ahead fashion. Regenerative leadership then is a cyclical development process. It has two parts that we go through this process on a regular basis to ease out any glitches, any bad behavior and so on that might come in. This is the internal part of regenerative leadership. The external part is your spin-offs, your M&As, your joint ventures. Really is organizations at this level that are really fit to take on board growth by M&A and joint venture. Now, just a quick brief. You might think that's a light enough touch, but just a brief glimpse of the kind of science that's behind this. It really organizes all of psychology across. You see psychoanalysis, cognitive psychology, and humanism, and more besides. I just want a quick look at this. Organization development models. You can see the gaps that it exposes in prevailing practice and modeling. And again, this is only a glimpse at a few of them. This, by the way, this presentation is available afterwards, so you can read through this at your leisure. Now, this is our model. These are the levels, and these are the capabilities organized in dynamics. And the term dynamic is about force. These are discrete forces. And in terms of work, in terms of goals, for example, these are the constructs behind the buy-in technique, goal setting. My thing is blocked here. Integration at individual level, involvement, how involved people are in setting their goals, and so on. Capability behind the dynamics, and there are 5 to 7 of these behind each of these dynamics. So people would diagnose, and they appear, as you see here, on the graphic. And as we know from the previous 51% of organizations are here. So that graphic is a little optimistic. And you can see how impactful it should be to management to see organizations where they really are. This is a brief glimpse at the architecture of the model. We have the organizational system, the dynamics at this level, and we can produce diagnostics and developmental patterns at each of these levels. This is a kind of a triage approach. We can do a simple one question for each dynamic at one level of diagnostic, and at another level we can itemize each of the constructs within those dynamics for a thorough assessment of your organization and prescription for development along each dynamic. Now, the problem with culture, and here we are, culture will be now defined as habituation, and I want to just go through the patterns of habituation that occur at each of these levels. As I mentioned before, the first level is degenerative disruption. So this is this motivating shielding of corrupt centers. So the dictators around the world are more prominent in this, but they have a network of people around them that protect them. But basically, like the embezzlement of the managers, we're dealing with exploitation, their management by aggression, and so on. The disconnect from the market is obsolescence and a schizoid system. That happens all the time. They stick to a product, stick to a technology, and obsolescence is the result. Another thing that is cultural, again, it is attached to personality type or cultural type, is a failure to launch, paralysis by analysis. Critical thinking, where a single leader is really making all the decisions and choices. This is a tremendous loss of vitality and responsiveness for your system. Mentoring is also not good. You're producing clones. You want coaching rather than mentoring. And companies do get stuck in critical singularities. Intel did it drastically to a chip in the 80s. Beautiful paper written on it, refer to the chip as a creosote bush. The creosote bush in the desert that burns everything that comes near to it. That's what happened to strategy in Intel until they broke through the defensiveness that was around it. Critical divergence, this opportunism that is characteristic of a phase of development here, you never get out of it. As a consultant, you go into an organization and you chart out what they're at, and the next thing you find that you have large white pages all over the room, and you just have to organize them into divisions or whatever. On a social-emotional level, our habituational patterns are around socialist cultures, niche-bound system, symbiotic relationships, and in fact, the case study I'm going to present afterwards is a symbiotic relationship. This destabilization, this is a horrible place to be. This is frustrated people who want to develop but can't. They're caught in this organization that is niche-bound. These are the people that become disenfranchised when you fail in your organizational development attempt. These people have no option but they either degrade or they leave. Operational learning, a lot of organizations train their people to hell, and that's as far as they get. There's no strategy behind it. Here we come to the archetypal bureaucratic system. Your process and procedure dominates the organization, and you're killing the dynamism which is typical of the levels above. Now, these will all degrade to these levels that are shown there as well, which is interesting. So competitiveness, if you don't go beyond the competitiveness, you will degrade to contest, which is this critical divergence, this reflexism level down here, 2B. You will be just competing with each other, and this firefighting and burnout will result. The competitive system, you must get beyond the creativity or it will degrade into a socialist kind of atmosphere and culture. So our competitive advantage level, failure to systemize dissipates energy, degrading the system to 2B. The point here is that if you don't move from one level to the next, you're bound to degrade. That is one of the strengths of this model. Every problem in an organization of a particular level is resolved by moving to the next level. So in 6B here, we have a system with our self-directed teams and all of that, but if you fail to move to the leadership level, which is next, fail to take charge of your market, to take the leadership in the market, you lose that advantage. And this is what happened, what we call Apple 1. Apple in its first its constitution, it had this creative advantage, but it missed all of these levels. It wasn't taking feedback from the market. It hadn't its process and procedure and so on. It literally was working out of a kind of its own creativity, which is down here, this incubation level. But Microsoft comes along and it has all of these in place. It is reacting to what the market wants and passes it out. Finally, we have the internal growth will limit. Well, Apple II are a bit guilty of that now. They have huge cash. They're still relying on their own products. They should be going to the next level by M&A, by acquisition, and so on. And even at the highest level, without the internal regenerative process, you get arrogance and self-reliance, and that there's plenty of case studies on where this has happened. So redefining culture. A quick shot here at the most comprehensive, you see this Linan's culture, this one here. This is an itemization of culture differentiation by the most comprehensive study of culture. And you see they map directly onto the different phases of the DSMT model. And indeed, the DSMT would bring in stuff that is missed in the Lenan culture analysis. So this, and these, is important to note that these are all ordered in increasing return for GDP across countries. So it is important to note that it kind of validates the effectiveness in terms of results and performance because the correlation is so clear. Now I have in there care of everything. So the words used in Lenan are not directly corresponding, but in brackets I have the defining feature of each culture. Now I'll look back at what we 1%. This is research by McKenzie that is referenced at the end of the presentation. 51% are trapped at these three lower levels. There is a 500% discount at that level. So 27% are categorized as bureaucratic, which produce our market average, and only 22% achieve the three levels. There's a 300% premium for agility. Well, they are increasing exponentially when you get into the leadership and the regenerative. If you're an organization that is spinning off companies and products, you're well above that 300%. So that is the important insight, is that now we can redefine culture as habituative level. We can look at research that is out there and understand the value of the higher levels of culture, the higher levels of development. One of the important conclusions here is that culture, which is, we've defined it as literally what's happening, what people are actually doing. If you observe Apple One, they're highly creative, highly innovative, beautiful place to work. Everyone is full of joy, but that's its culture. It's not its maturity. Maturity is way down the line. So if you focus on culture, you're wasting your time. And I've highlighted this with the Apple instance again. Actually, that's all this slide is about. But there are other case studies that show this kind of disparity between maturity as a hidden deficit of capability and culture as a beguiling, blinding kind of sense of security. We have Polaroid had a 2-year advantage on digital technology, but their leader decided that people would always want paper, and the organization heeded the leader. This was pure groupthink, pure critical singularity, and they folded, whereas the Intel situation was turned around. Those case studies are referenced at the end. So what we do, we measure the maturity of critical capabilities in an organization, and we drive through the maturity. This is where you bust the culture. You build your capabilities up through the levels of maturity and drive through culture. Simply assessing the behavior, which is what most change management diagnostics do, is doomed to failure. We assess from the bottom up. We stop at the first phase that is not evident, and the one below that is your level of maturity. That is where you start with your developmental processes. If you're reading from the bottom up and you come to something that is glaringly not feature of your organizational functioning in each capability, that is the maturity of your capability. The one below that, the highest evident level of capability. That's where your organization development and change management starts. That is where your traction is gained and your process as well. So all change must follow the DSMT process, from disruption, from your change agent, from your leader, going around among the troops, the people, finding who's motivated for change, organizing them, and so on, selling them the new idea, presenting them with the prevailing diagnostic for disorienting dilemma, and driving on. So conclusion. Famous maxims like that are wide of the mark, dangerously wide. It is always immaturity that undermines strategy or change. It is always maturity that gives effectiveness and drives strategy or change. So the trick is to have maturity and culture at the same level. So in the Apple One, we have our innovation, but we have everything else supporting it. Process, procedure, everybody's on board, dynamic feedback from the marketplace, etc. And of course, to have it fit your organizational strategy. And hopefully people do want to gain the highest level of agility when highest levels are associated with better returns. Now, here's an important point. Maturity is more important than culture for change motivation. This is very subtle. Culture is to an organization what mindset is to an individual. So, not only is it typically diagnostic, but because it's a mirror image for the people, it is natural for these people to rationalize defensiveness against it. If you're saying to people in a diagnostic, well, this is how you are, and that they know that's how they are, and they like that's how they are, well, you're going nowhere as far as motivating change is concerned. Showing a cultural diagnostic mirrors prevailing mindset, so there's no disorienting dilemma. On the other hand, showing maturity, and I've seen this work with the graphic, it is a shock. It is a shock. It undermines people. There is a stop when they see it, and that's your starting point. This is a brief thing. I'll leave this to people to look at their own time. This is where your change comes unstuck at the different levels. These are the critical points you have to get over for each phase of your developmental process. You've got to get your boundaryless system going, or you can't move on to your competitive advantage and so on. People engagement is a most critical feature of this level here. Okay, now here's another dimension to culture which the model brings out that has not been brought out before. Linear mindset and culture. This is predominant on people's thinking about culture, to be honest, linear mindset. So there is a straight line schema organizing how people think and how cultures think. It has been cited for the 2008 financial crash, that they all went over the cliff together, that all the dealers and all the financial people just followed the herd. This is a kind of a linear approach. But the straight line, if you think of it in a person's mind, this is what organizes them. It is divisive. You have, black and white. You have protectionism. Once you have divisiveness, you have togetherness, outgrouping, and so on will be a feature of linear thinking. Short-termism, the definition of a line is the shortest distance between 2 points. And you can think of world leaders who will fit this description. Solutions without diagnostic, and this is a massive problem with our culture, that we are a solutions-driven culture. But that is why, because we have a lot of linear-minded people, and remember, linear, as you see there, they have a hierarchical view of the world, and they prefer to be higher up the hierarchy. So linear mindset is more about power, and those people who are in power, they prefer the short term, the quick solution, rather than the diagnostic process. This is linear mindset and culture. So this would be behind some of the phases of our model. But we also have the model that is out that is not brought out anywhere else, and this is lateral mindset and culture. So for example, if we like that socialist culture where you're engaging with people, this is your more natural tendency, the multidimensionalism, the inclusiveness, the empathy. These are what drives lateral mindset. And unfortunately, you have one that wants to go in a straight direction as quick as possible, and the other wants to spend as much time not really going anywhere. And that is our differentiation of among those phases, but also on a broader canvas as well. But note how each antagonizes the other. Note how this polarization is happening in politics all over the world. I think this is a kind of a critical insight into every level of socioeconomic system. Now, due to personality type, we can all be differentiated by type, but we are either one or the other. We either are prone to linearity or laterality, but hopefully people grow through the phases that I have outlined for organizations, the corresponding phases for personal development that have been validated in the psychological applications of the model. If growing through those phases gives you integrative mindset. So you are inclusive, but not neurotically inclusive. You bring rational direction to the system. You have a systems view. Linear thinking does not tolerate systems view. So integrative approach is what we are looking for, an integrative maturation process. We have models out there already capture this, but now we can understand it in a different manner. This model shows really only one proper outcome, which is cooperation, this win-win. The rest you can see are defined as linear or lateral, but cooperation as it is described there, your collaboration and so on, they would be your integrative process. So culture and leadership. True empowerment is advocated by all leaders of agile organizations. If you want to be agile, you have to have empowerment. This is a result of research. But this occurs at the advantage and the expressionist. Everyone is free to express themselves as required across a barrierless system. Integrative leadership, everybody is a leader. So this is our second highest level of organization. Everybody is a leader. Expressionist culture, level 6A, is a basis for emergence of regenerative leadership, which is an interesting finding in Irish history as well as in organizations, that when you have a culture that is expressive, where people are free to express themselves, there is a dynamism there that produces regenerative leadership. People emerge from that system to take charge of complex issues and so on. And authentic leadership, which is well, it's given a certain amount of definition, but it is freshly defined, I think, by the model, because it is somebody who has matured through all of the phases, through all of the capabilities. They can do the turnaround, which is your lower critical leadership, your planning, your crisis management, delegating. These are all the different levels of the maturity model. So authentic leadership has these market connections, is familiar with innovation and collaboration, etc. So a quick recap of what these cultures look like. This is your critical singularity. This is your authoritarian culture. This is groupthink. This is a bunch of people who know what is happening is wrong, but they have not got the culture. They've been put down that often. Their predecessors have been put down that often that they're yes men. And this is well researched by Janice. Things like the Challenger disaster, the Bay of Pigs disaster, loads of historical disasters have occurred because people get like this. And the Intel technology is a case in point as well. Our critical level 2, this is chaos. This is what chaos looks like. This is what it looks like to go into this organization and you've charted what they're doing and it's all over the room. And you have to bring some sense to it. This is habituated opportunism. It happens. Notice on our comfort zone culture, notice that this model has comfort zone, learning zone, and growth zone. Well, we would agree with that. Our model would agree with that. But you see the fear zone there, just around the comfort zone. That is an issue for every level of the model. This is a very important point. Comfort zone has a definitive level. It is the socio-emotive level. But in the real sense, we all have personality types. We would prefer to be at different stages of that model. Creative people would prefer to be at the yellow level, the 6 level. That's where creativity, the apple one, that's where that happens. That's where they would like to be. That's their comfort zone. So every zone has this. Every level of the model has a fear level around it. And the challenge is for your change management is to break through that fear level. Okay. This is a snapshot at a place I have often gone into organizations, and in our semi-state cultures, certainly of a few years ago, where this people caught within a niche, expectations and very little growth opportunity. This is what it looked like. People going nowhere, frustrated desire for change. And as I said, if these people are disenfranchised, they leave. The organization suffers because of failure, change. This is an idea of the juxtaposition of your operational cultures. These are the blue levels of the model in the graphic on the higher corner, and the maroon or red level, learning zone and performance. So I'm just making a point that it's kind of known out there, the kind of relationships that we are integrating into one model. Excuse me. You can see your performance tasks, you're feeding back into the system, you're building up your dynamic learning, and so on. So the customized culture, you're building towards operationalizing customization and into feeding the customer your environmental scanning, customer intimacy, and those features that we've discussed already. The advantage level, which is about creativity, innovation, self-expression, and so on. Kind of a little capture that the caption that captures this. They're standing. It's dynamic. You have a person. He's kind of standing assertively. He's pleading his case. He's not running it down people's throats. Just a snapshot, capturing personal autonomy, innovation. Definitely beyond linear. We're not sitting down like the guys around the table facing up to the dictator. Engaging. This guy is, I would think he's engaging enough. He's non-confrontational anyway. And at our 6B, we have our autonomous structures, self-organization in teams, and so on. Our next level, the integrative leadership, is captured very beautifully by this card. Everyone is a leader. That is really what that integrative leadership is about. Everybody is leading inside, they're representing the organization in leadership fashion outside. That is leadership culture. It is integrative culture. And regenerative culture, I want to point this up. Another capture that captures what we're about. At the lowest level, we have that exploitation. We have singularity there that's depleting the system. Sustain, that would be our competitive level. It's dynamic feedback and so on. But regenerative is where you're spinning off, where you're coaching people to be their own people. These are people emerging in their own right. They're not copies of somebody else. This is what regeneration is about. Companies and people emerging out of your regenerative ecosystem as entities with their own motivation and their own integrity. So this is a case study of culture change with the process. The client was a subsidiary of a multinational manufacturing company supplying their single flagship client. Okay. So the presenting problem actually was a demoralized senior team. They had to stay with the company because they couldn't find employment locally. The diagnosis, the culture diagnosis, would have shown people at the upper end of their sector. They were efficient. They were, secure and competitive. They were providing high-tech product to this client, but the maturity was very different. The senior team in the organization reflected a lot of critical singularity and inversion due to the amount of client oversight. So these people were not really empowered. They were not using their own executive functioning. They were reacting all the time. So the diagnosis was well received as making sense, and its personal graphic nature caused the motivation for change. Again, it was quite a shock. They're dealing with this high-class client, but their maturity levels is explaining why the senior team are just not getting on. There is that much inversion there that, well, I mean, a couple of them had turned to behavior that was not high level either. So the remedy, this was the only division of the company that initiated a selling beyond the niche client. So this was quite a change for the company. But when the graphic explanation was provided, they responded. So the process went well. And I want you to note this idea that I've captured here in the title as an integrative platform. The org-CMF, the application of this model, is a platform for the use of HR strategy. It integrates HR strategy and so on. With Myers-Briggs' help, which I did myself, the marketing role was actually filled from within the team. So a person who was actually quite frustrated within a very confining role suddenly found himself out in the marketplace with a briefcase and a car, and he was thrilled. So the outcome, the dynamic strategy was profitably adopted by the multinational. So that was a tremendous outcome, really. high morale is sustained, and the company is a thriving success. I just, before we finish, want to this is the architecture which we've kind of covered before. These are the different levels you can take these diagnostics. Your triage, just a quick snapshot will give you one figure for each of these. Gives you an idea of where you're at in culture. It can create your disorienting dilemma to proceed onto the deeper diagnostic of these levels, of these critical capabilities. And also you can configure, not every culture, not every organization would have the same emphasis, but across the 15 dynamics, your physical resources, work, emotion, cognition, personal, interpersonal, management, leadership, strategy, goals, reward, product, finance, customer, macro environment. For agility, innovation, these are all different formats. If these are your focus, then just different inclusions of the different dynamics will be more appropriate. All right. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. These are references which will be available for people to check out what I was saying. And I just want to mention that our next webinar is on the 29th of April at 1400 GMT, and it is the emotional dynamic. Half of human nature is emotion. We are poorly understood in that regard, and it is the energy of an organization, and we will look at what DSMT transforms, how DSMT transforms that as well. Okay, so this is our questions and answers. If anybody has questions, I'd be happy to take.
So Miles, a number of questions came in. Let me just grab one here. Can linear mindset and hierarchy be perceived instead of as a competence-driven rather than power-driven?
I don't think so. Competence-driven rather than power-driven. No, if I get the meaning of that. Well, I would say the situation can be. It is important to understand the critical singularity. If you're in a turnaround situation, I probably haven't emphasized this, you want really a regenerative leader to adopt that critical leader where they make decisions quickly in a crisis situation. So there is an interplay between competence and power. Not fully sure I understand the question. Can it be competence driven? Well, unless the entire rest of the staff were totally incompetent and you were the only one, or the leader was the only one capable of making decisions, that's the only situation I can see where competence would justify a linear approach.
Okay, thanks, Miles. We can come back to it with the individual that raised it after the session, if that's not adequate. What exactly do you mean by habituation?
Okay, habituation is you have 7 levels. We all have personality types which are different. Cultures within companies, whether they're science-based, quality-based, sales-based, will have different comfort zones, as I said. And habituation is the process where you get stuck in your comfort zone. And the problem with human nature is that if you don't keep on the developmental track, if you get stuck, not only will you just get stuck, but you are bound to degrade. People are bound to leave who would provide some vitality to the organization. Habituation is literally getting stuck somewhere on that hierarchy. And 51% of organizations are stuck in the disintegrative lower levels of the model.
Okay, so the next question I have here is, the leader is often said to set the culture or influence the culture in the organization. Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, it's a lovely question. I read a book once called Strategic Leadership, and it itemized a number of case studies where leaders who were terrible in one situation were brilliant in another. And that was because their personality fit the demands of the situation, whether it would be rousing people or making proper financial decisions. The leader definitely needs to be congruent with the situation. Now, as I alluded to, the idea of authentic leadership is pretty prominent in organizational science, but this model brings a new definition to this, insofar as if people have matured through their careers and experienced each level, of behavior, from the turnaround situation right up to the managing innovation and so on. That is your real authentic leader. And the authentic leader, and ideally the authentic change management agent, should be able to fit whatever culture they find, and bring that experience to bear.
Okay, thanks. And the final question I have here is are the culture assessments out there not useful? They're very commonly used.
I think that you have to come back to this idea of failure. It is real. 75% is real. I mean, even for your digital transformation, without digital savvy in an organization, they're actually over 85%. It's really a terrible indictment of the science that's been available. Sorry, what's the question again, Declan?
Let me just get it here again. It was basically stating that, there's very widely used.
Oh, the culture assessments.
So are you saying they're not useful, or?
Well, I might appear arrogant to say that they're not useful, but I think I've shown the deficits. They're giving you no starting point for development. That's the problem. They're misleading to people. They are providing comfort to people. They're actually reinforcing people in their own behavior. They're not creating the disorienting dilemma that's needed. So there is a lot that is antagonizing the developmental and change process. I'd leave it at that.
Okay, there's no, okay, here's one that's come in. Is the model predictive in nature? If so, what has been done to validate the model?
Well, predictive in nature, the case studies have turned out well. The correlations with the models that are, the correlations with, for example, the McKinsey study that I showed you there with the different percentages, that would be validating the predictive nature of the model. If you are diagnosed at a certain level, then you should be across all capabilities. Then you should be at a certain level of return, and that is both through the McKinsey research, that is for companies, but it is also borne out in the correspondence with the Lenan research, which is for countries across the European Union. Okay, so it should be predictive of where companies are, yes.
Okay, there's another question here. How do you work on improving organization maturity in the context of various other capabilities that underlie any organization? Product development, manufacturing, finance, etc.
Yeah, well, each of those are dynamics of the basic model. I mean, finance, you have to understand, and people don't take on board the damage that financial arrangements have on literally the morale of companies and leadership teams. I mean, I've been in a leadership team meeting where the dictate from the White Knight that saved the company, the venture capital, their expected returns came in and literally it killed the meeting. There are financial ratio analyses that match onto the model as well, different levels of stress. That's been known since Beaver in 1966. The ratio measurements that predict failure and predict success, really, they do map onto the model as well.
I think it's fair to say, Miles, that each dynamic and each construct has its own development roadmap. So it covers each of the 7 levels.
That is correct. Each capability has its own discrete developmental, normative, prescribed process. Yes.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we're running up towards the scheduled end time. I'll just give one last minute or two for anybody to add if there's any final questions, and just to thank you, Miles, for your thoughts and your time today, and to ask the attendees, if they're willing, we'll send a very short sort of quality survey on this masterclass so we can drive improvement in the future. And as Miles indicated, April the 29th is the next masterclass on the emotional dynamic of the organization, looking at it in the context of emotional intelligence. So without further ado, thank you everybody for your attendance, and feel free to contact us by email or phone if you have any further questions.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody.
Bye. Thank you.